Hello everyone. In this video we are going to continue from where we left off in our previous video where we created a failover cluster, and we are going to configure some services in this cluster. In this video the service that we are creating is a file service, and we are gonna create two shares with continuous availability. One share will be a general purpose share, and another one will be a scale-out file server share. The difference between these two is that the general purpose share is meant for normal file servers to store office data and things like this, while the scale-out file server share is meant to store, for example, virtual hard disk files for Hyper-V or SQL databases for Microsoft SQL Server. First, we are going to install, of course, the file services role on both FS01A and FS01B, our two cluster nodes. And in my case, it seems that I already had this role installed, so hooray for me, I can continue. Next, before we run the rest of the code, you have to make sure that your cluster object, so in my case FS01, has the permissions to create computer objects in the OU where it is placed. So in our case, in servers where FS01 is placed, we have to give it the right to create computer objects itself, so it can create the computer objects for our file server. So we go to properties. Actually, first we enable advanced features in our users and computers console, and then on servers we go to properties, then to security, and here we can go directly to advanced and add a new entry. Let's select computers and search for FS01, or in your case whatever the name of your cluster object is. In my case it's FS01, and I'm going to give it, besides the normal permissions, the default ones, I'm going to let it create computer objects. Okay. So this is done. Now we can continue, and the next command that we have to run will have to be run directly from one of the cluster nodes, not through PowerShell remoting, and it is the actual command to create the file services role. So we have to give it an IP address. This will be the name of the cluster role, and it will have also an object in Active Directory with this name, and the storage that this role will use is cluster disk 2. So here is the command. I completed already the IP address that I want to have for this role. Let's run it, and in no time we should have everything set up. And as you see, it's done. Let's continue now from the domain controller with PowerShell remoting, because we still have some stuff to do. I will connect to FS01A through PowerShell remoting, and the next thing I will do is set up FS01G to also publish a PTR record in DNS. So this is the command to set this property, and then we just have to stop this resource, start it up. Also we have to start up the file server resource. And now if we go to DNS, we should see that this has been registered in our reverse lookup zone. And if we go to Active Directory also, we should now see FS01G. So everything worked. Now with our role created and configured, let's actually go and create a share. First we are going to make a folder for the share, and our disk is E, so the disk that we used as a resource for our role. And to create the share, we just give it the name, the path, and as the scope, we specify our role name. So this will mean that this share is part of our file services cluster role. And let's create it. And I'll show you now in Cluster Manager what we just did. So here is the FSO1G role. And if we go to shares, you will see that we can see here the share that we have just created. And talking about the disks, cluster disk2 is the disk that we used, and this is mounted as drive E on the active server, meaning FSO1A in this case. And with these commands, we have just created a general purpose file share. Next, we are going to create a scale out file server and create a share in that scale out file server. So remember that the share that we created until now is only to be used for general purpose file services stuff like hosting Office files, PDFs and whatever. The next share that we will set up is for applications that support scale out file services like, of course, Hyper-V. So the first thing to do is to add cluster disk3 to our cluster shared volume, because scale out file services uses cluster shared volumes, which came out, or not came out, but was much improved in Windows Server 2012, and it's basically the same thing now. So now cluster disk3 is added to the cluster shared volume. And with this, we can now create our scale out file server. But for this command to work, we have to run it directly from the one of the cluster nodes. And here it is. Now it will create the scale out file server role, and it's already done. So we can jump back to the domain controller. And with that done, we can now create also a share that can be used for Hyper-V or SQL databases, for example. And this is a special situation, so we will not create the folder under a specific letter, because when you add disks to the cluster shared volume, we actually use mount points to add them as volumes in this folder. And we will create this folder in volume 1. So it's created, and now we can share this folder, so with the specific path, with a name, and of course the scope is in this case FSO1 SOFS, because we want it to be part of the scale out file server. And we have just created the share. Let me also show you in Cluster Manager. So you see that disk3 is now part of the cluster shared volume. You see that we have another role, and we have our share that we have just created. And this was basically it. We have just created two continuously available shares, one general purpose, one part of a scale out file server. If you like the video, please like it and share it. Also subscribe if you're not subscribed, and thanks a lot for watching.